Welcome to episode 309 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Julien Le Signor. He is Head of Environment at Geopost. We're going to talk about measuring and reporting emissions in the last mile. And indeed, we'll talk about Geopost's new carbon calculator tool. So coming up in just a moment, Julien Le Signor, Head of Environment at Geopost. Joining me on the line is Julien Le Signor. He's the Head of Environment at Geopost. Julien, welcome. We're going to talk about Geopost's new carbon calculator. First of all, what is it?
This is a great question. So Geopost Carbon Calculator is, I would say, an internally developed tool that leverages the richness of data we collect on a daily basis, throughout our network, because we deliver parcels, so we scan them, etc. So there's a breadth of data that we collect right day in, day out. And to account for emissions accurately, it processes it in near real time and in line also with globally recognized standards. So this powerful calculation engine that I described, it remains behind the scenes, right? It's doing all this work, but not being properly visible on your screen. While our online dashboard solution, let's call it the carbon dashboard, is leveraging our MyDPD for Business platform and is providing a user-friendly, customer-facing dashboard accessible anytime, for our customers.
So tell us a little bit about, I suppose, the how next. So it's a tool that displays the emissions, but when does it start calculating? Is it as soon as the parcel enters the Geopost system? So how does it all work?
Yes, I think also, to be honest, Ian, it's a data-driven project. And I think most of my time on this project has really been dedicated to the definition of the data requirements and model to be used for a carbon calculator. To give you an order of magnitude, we deliver, on an average day, between 7 and 8 million parcels. I'm not talking about Christmas or Black Friday, but just a regular day. And for each of them, there are several scanning events, composed of tens of data points each. Each scanning event, for example, is just a parcel transiting through one of our sites. So that as well, on the tracking page, you can see it. And we have also all the data related to the associated vehicle and all the fleet, in all our different countries transporting them. All of this complexity must be orchestrated properly in real time for the system to provide a reliable output every time a parcel is delivered, and in a few seconds. So when it comes to the front-end solution, or let's call it the carbon dashboard, we've decided to collaborate directly with the end users, being our customers, who's better positioned to, advise us on what to do than the people using the tool on a monthly, quarterly basis. And what we've done is basically transparently share the different project steps and journey we were on to, provide them access to our online platform to test and pilot the solution, organize workshops, collect feedback, adapt the tool obviously where needed. Maybe one example of that is a customer asking us maybe to report emissions for home deliveries, but also for out-of-home deliveries, in pickup shops. So this is a functionality we've added. And, through this collaborative approach, I think we're really confident that the carbon calculator solution that we've developed will meet the customers' expectations of ours. Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned that there was a collaborative approach, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about is sort of the why part of this. Why develop a carbon calculator tool? Is it for those e-commerce retailers that are lodging parcels into the Geopost system? And if so, how are they going to use this data? What's the point of them having this data?
Let me start maybe with the fact that the world has significantly changed over the past few years. There is an increasing awareness around sustainability issues. We have a clear drive from consumers, that are more and more educated on those topics, from governments as well, especially with the upcoming CSRD, the Corporate Social Reporting Directive from the EU. from investors as well, which are now including more and more ESG KPIs at the core of their investment decisions. So, and the list goes on, right? So, as a consequence of this, shift of situation and of context, our customers, being the shippers, it's actually companies from all different sectors, whether B2B, B2C, are now all stepping up at different pace, but their sustainability approach with new climate commitments, new carbon reduction plans, leading to an increased scrutiny, I would say, on all their emission sources, including transport. To illustrate this, I think there's an interesting KPI to look at. I mean, it's the number of validated science-based targets on the SBTi website. So just very briefly, the SBTi is a global NGO actually providing and working on standards for corporates to set targets in line with climate science, so the IPCC work. It's publicly available, so anyone can have a look. And if you dig into the historic data since the creation of the SBTi in 2015, you observe that in 2020, for example, there were only 400 companies in the world having their science-based targets set. So I mean properly validated. End of 2022, it's 2,000, and right now it's 2,700. Meaning for the first 6 months only of 2023, it's more than 700 companies having validated their own targets. So there's a clear acceleration. And in the past, customers really only wanted to report their emissions for many, compliance purposes, right? They were required by the existing and still active NFRD, so non-financial reporting directive from the EU. But now and more, they are actively willing to understand how their emissions are evolving over time, as well as act whenever possible alongside their transport partners, so us, right, to reduce these emissions in line with their own commitments and targets. I think this is related to an increasing maturity across the industry that was probably focusing on scope 1 and 2 emissions at first, right? So maybe the emissions you control first, within a company, it makes sense to focus on that first. But no, more and more into scope 3 emissions, where transport, to be honest, a quite hard to decarbonize sector, plays a big role emission-wise. Did you know, that the transport sector is the one that has the highest reliance on fossil fuels of any end-use sector in the industry? And then the freight transport sector accounts for 7% of global emissions, so it's very significant amount of emissions to be tackled. So Geopost, as a consequence, already has set itself very ambitious climate goals of reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions by 43% across all scopes by 2030 versus 2020, and in absolute value. This is aligned on a 1.5 degree pathway, so the most ambitious one based on the IPCC work. But we've observed that customers, on top of working with an engaged partner with a climate mitigation roadmap, they really want to witness concrete improvements here and now. And all of this to say that this is really what this new tool is aiming at doing, allowing customers to report, even if it's not the core focus as of now, it's still required, allowing customers to understand the emission trend. And for that, obviously, we provide details on maybe how the shipment profile has evolved. Maybe the size or the weight of your parcels has increased, therefore maybe increasing the emissions. But also ultimately, witness the emission reductions that we do as Geopost on their behalf. Meaning if we deploy additional electric vehicles, for example, they will be able to see the share of deliveries that were done with an electric vehicle directly on the dashboard and see it evolve over time as well. And I think this level of transparency between our carbon reduction actions and the emissions of our customers is really key. And I think building trust in a way through this new carbon calculator.
You mentioned earlier about the SBTi and the increasing willingness of corporates to have an accredited targets. Is that the right way of putting it? Can you talk a bit about accreditation when it comes to the tool itself?
So the Smart Price Center is a global NGO, right, working on transport decarbonization topics, and they indeed offer these accreditation services. I think you can see the accreditation similarly to an audit, where the objective is to confirm the compliance of our system with the GLEC framework, so the Global Logistics Emission Council framework. This framework is then aligned also with the new ISO norms, so the ISO 14083. So apologies for being slightly technical here, but what you need to remember is that this is a globally recognized framework for transport and logistics emissions accounting that is used by most of the industry peers that we have, us, but also most of our customers as well. And take a step back, I think it's a critical requirement for any new carbon reporting tool nowadays to be compliant with those norms and frameworks to ensure consistency across the industry, in the calculation methodology, of course, but also in the calculation scope, and the different reporting practices. And I think it's a way as well to, one more time, create trust between us and the customer on the reliability of the results we provide, and as well as the, I guess, expertise that we have, internally when it comes to carbon accounting as a whole.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about was sort of what makes Geopost's carbon calculator different to what else is out there. We've seen just in the last couple of months a few big announcements from carriers who are embarking on a similar journey, let's say, of trying to provide visibility about the environmental impact of the logistics or delivery part of the world. What can you tell us about what's different about Geopost is doing?
When we think about what's different, I guess it really depends on what we compare carbon calculator to. But assuming we kind of could compare it to probably maybe the previous solution we had as a reference, I would emphasize on three main elements that are really new, really different, and I think really also bringing something right to the industry. I think the first one would be the granularity of the data inputs, using each scanning events from a tracking system, associating identified transport legs with the vehicles from our fleet, really to reflect the reality of our operations. I mean, when we deploy an electric van, be it in Germany, France, the UK, or Italy, maybe this electric van will probably never deliver any parcel for one single customer, because probably the delivery locations of this specific customer is not actually fitting the location of this electric van. So this customer will not, get the emission reductions from this electric vehicle. Whereas if this vehicle that has been deployed, let's say in the Paris area, for example, and we have a customer having deliveries within the Paris area, you will get the emission reductions from this specific electric vehicle. So it's really providing a link between what's happening concretely on the ground, physically, with the deliveries of parcels, with the emissions accounting and the data that is fed back to the customer. I think that's really key. The second point would be the processing speed. Given the scale of the data process, as I mentioned earlier, being able to provide carbon footprint of a parcel in a few seconds after its delivery remains, I guess, fascinating to me, right? And any customer of ours will be able then to have a look at their data almost real time online. So we've been reducing, the time required to get access to carbon reporting. And I think that's really key, in making this more accessible. I guess anyone working in the sustainability reporting field, listening to us, will also know sometimes how hard it is to collect data, process it, and then obviously deliver it to a customer or any other stakeholder. So having this also easily accessible is really key. And maybe the third point would be our data reporting or data visualization system based on MyDPT for Business is designed to be accessible anytime, designed to be user-friendly, I hope, and also allowing the user to download and further share content within its organization. So it's really supporting, having a better quality of data and more accessible within your own organization.
Well, Julien, this is all really interesting stuff. And I think it's all super relevant because it's going to fall increasingly upon, in my opinion, carriers, whether they're private delivery companies or publicly owned postal operators, to give more visibility about emissions. And there's a whole load of sophistication and data that needs to be deployed in order to achieve that. And hopefully out of this, we'll not just be reporting our emissions, but working on making delivery more efficient and therefore obviously better for the environment. But it's a complex nut to crack. Can you have a complex nut to crack, everybody? Answers on a postcard. Anyway, we'll be looking forward to seeing how the carbon calculator and other tools are deployed and the impact they have on the sector. Julien Le Signor, Head of Environment at Geopost, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today. Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Helene Boulder-Rai returns. We're going to talk about urban warehouses. Johan Peters will join us. I've only been teasing that interview for 2 months. Johan joining us to talk about urban logistics. It will come up soon, I swear. Honest, folks, it will. And also coming up soon, Kate Muth from IMAG talking about cross-border parcels, the US Postal Service, legislative changes, VAT rules, those sorts of things. All interesting stuff. And make sure you don't miss any of these episodes. Sign up for the Postal Hub e-newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com. You can sign up there to my weekly newsletter. You get an email from me every time I release a new episode. You can sign up for the Daily Delivery Digest while you're over there. It's a free email every weekday with the delivery headlines, the headlines from the delivery world. You all know what I mean. Sign up. It's free. If you don't like it, unsubscribe. Well, what's it cost you? Nothing. What's that song? Doesn't matter. Anyway, always look on the bright side of life, wasn't it? Anyway, we're getting to the end of the episode, everybody. I'm getting quite silly here. If I haven't already mentioned it many, many times, I'll mention it again. Subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform so you get every episode downloaded to the device of your choosing. If you want to email me, ian@thepostalhub.com is my email address. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.